Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Great Leadership. My guest today, Bob Sutton, professor and organizational psychologist at Stanford. He's the best-selling author of numerous books, including Scaling Up Excellence, Good Boss, Bad Boss, The No Asshole Rule, and his brand new book, The Friction Project, How Smart Leaders Make the Right Things Easier and the Wrong Things Harder. And in today's episode, we're going to be covering a few different things. Hopefully, we'll get to all of them. We're going to talk about what friction actually is. We'll look at good friction and bad friction, maybe some common traps that are out there. We're also going to talk about how to spot good and bad friction, some friction forensics, and then towards the Leader's Toolkit section, the last part of the episode, we're going to talk about where to actually begin and dive a little bit deeper into how to become a friction fixer yourself. So, Bob, thank you for joining me.
Oh, it's great to be here with you, Jacob. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yes, it'll be fun. So why don't we start off with just high level, the research that went into this book, because I think you said you spent several years doing this. And so
Oh.
what did you actually look at as you're giving that deep sigh of
Well, maybe it's. I don't understand. The older I get, the more time I think I should take on things, which doesn't make sense since I have less time to live. But this project, and plus I'm an academic, so and so is Huggy, so we're compulsive. So we spent we say 7 years in the book, but we're still working on the project, so it's 8 years. And so we did things like academic studies. Huggy led a study looking at actually 2,000 teams in a large software company to see
Mhm.
which ones had good velocity versus bad velocity in terms of software projects. So that's kind of part of the friction project. We did all sorts of case studies. So case study of Uber was interesting. AstraZeneca, how they had an effort that they actually saved people 2 million hours. Lots of we have a big network of people we would think of as good friction fixers. So we check back with them. We taught classes. We did workshops. We developed tools. I had a podcast, the Friction Podcast, for 2 years through Stanford, which was really fun till the internal funding ran out. so that was 22 episodes, and so we just try, and of course we scoured the academic and popular literature to find anything we could find, and it was kind of just an ongoing 2 year conversation, and then we probably finished, or I guess started the writing process. And that took maybe a year and a half to write the book,
Mm.
which for me, unfortunately, is fast.
Yeah, you're the
So
second person that I've had on this show to talk about friction. The first one was Lauren Nordgren. He wrote a book. I don't know if you know Lauren. He wrote a book called The Human Element, and he talked
no,
about 4 types of frictions in innovation, which were inertia, effort, reactance, and emotion. And
wow.
yeah, we talked. I think it was earlier this year or last year, but he was the only other person that talked about this idea of friction. So when I saw the title of your book, I was very intrigued with it. What exactly is friction?
Well, I'm not a physicist. We're organizational researchers, and to us, we're talking about organizational friction. So this is when, to me, when an individual or a team tries to do something in an organization, and it goes slower, it's more frustrating than they expect, or their first instinct is that's how they want it to be. So that's that idea of kind of like resistance from the system that slows you down. But I would hasten to add that we started out just obsessed with, organizations have red tape and all these emails
Yep.
and all these procedures, and I could go on the list and everything that drives us all crazy. But then, kind of a funny thing happened along the way, which is we kept running into all these ways in which actually slowing people down, maybe frustrating them a little bit, it actually is good. We can talk about them. And to us, we think of good leaders, an overly simplistic analogy is they got the gas and the brakes,
Yeah.
and they know when and how to hit them. So that's sort of the upshot of the book, and we can talk about some other nuances. But to us, that's the high level of the book as we think about the gas and the brakes, and good leaders are constantly thinking about that.
Okay. So some people might be saying, well, isn't that just kind of how business gets done? Isn't there always friction? Isn't there always challenges? Isn't there always obstacles? Isn't just that the nature of business and hierarchy and bureaucracy? So what what necessitates writing a book about that if that's the constant that everybody is just forced to
Well,
deal with in their day to
well,
day?
well, I actually love that question, and I can answer it in two ways: the cynical way and the optimistic way. Seriously, the cynical way is that because of the nature of organizations, that they're large, they're complex, they have histories and so forth, that there are always going to be obstacles to people getting things done, and we started out, and so it's either why bother or the books have already been written, but along the way, and that could be, and the other thing is, I will never change. Claim that what we have done is completely original. In fact, in one of my books, I proposed Sutton's Law. This is a book on evidence-based management. Sutton's Law is if you have an original idea, you probably don't. Someone already came up with it, and this isn't my idea either. That's Sutton's Law. So,
I like it.
so we tried to take our stab at it, and our stab at it in terms of, and there's something in your question about maybe it's a little bit of helplessness. And I'm not the most optimistic person in the world. I would say my co-author Huggy Rao is more optimistic, but along the way, I actually kept getting more and more optimistic because we kept running into these people, these organizations, who they actually would get rid of friction and clear the way.
Hmm.
And so there's reason for optimism. We're not just helpless victims of bureaucracy, or that's just going to crush us all eventually. Good things do happen. So
Yeah.
that, and we can talk about some of those good things. I'll give you one example which just amazes me though. One of the most impressive friction fixing efforts we've seen is from the California Department of Motor Vehicles. And
Yes.
we're actually, since we finished the book, we're actually starting to talk with them about a case study. But I had an encounter where I went to the DMV and I couldn't believe how smooth and how well organized it was, and how caring one manager was, one friction fixer who got us through the system efficiently. He was sort of like a tour guide for all of us.
Hmm.
And so we contacted the DMV and they said, yes, this is part of a systematic effort to reduce the burdens and frustration for our citizens. And they've got some numbers, they've made it happen.
I
So if the
haven't been to the DMV in a while, but the
yeah,
last time I went to the DMV was a couple years ago when I had to get my new Real ID, and it was a complete S show. It was a disaster. So I need to.
yeah.
I feel like I want to go to the DMV now just to test it out.
So literally, we talked to the head of the DMV last week, and he used the example of Real ID, and he said they have cut the amount of time from when you arrive at the DMV from to finish it on average 28 to 8 minutes. They're really
Wow.
proud of that. And they have you do a little bit. They have you do more stuff online before you go. They have to have a wet signature, so you still have to go to the DMV. But that's the perfect example, and that's what they bragged about most. And they've just this year really made a lot of progress on it.
Hmm.
So they've even fixed, and so if they can do it, anybody can do it.
Yeah.
Even Comcast, my provider.
Do you want to hear something really crazy? 96% of the people who watch videos on this channel are not subscribed. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. It'll literally take you 1 second, and you'll get notified when more videos just like this one are available. Now, let's get back to the content. Where does friction come from? Is this just kind of a natural byproduct as the more you grow, the more people you hire, the more bureaucracy gets created? Is a result of layer? I've had Gary Hamel, for example, on this show many times, and he talks about how much bureaucracy and hierarchy costs the economy.
Yeah. I'd love to have an argument with Gary. I know Gary pretty well, and Gary just rails against bureaucracy. Bureaucracy sucks. Everything should be centralized. So actually, I hate to say it, Gary's not a very good person empirically, and I would say this to his face. If you look at how organizations operate, and Gary won't recognize the most basic fact, which is the way as organizations get larger and more complex, they need hierarchy. They need specialized roles, and they need rules, and they need silos even. And I'm sorry, Gary, and I'll give you exhibit one of the most hierarchical, secretive, command and control, specialized organization on earth is Apple. I think they're doing okay. And they just have a system that basically works, and people get stuff done because people understand what their responsibilities are.
Yeah.
So our argument is that let's stop using the word bureaucracy. It's like, gee, I wish there wasn't gravity. Oh, I'm so angry at gravity. If we could only get rid of gravity and oxygen is really, it's just life. And so the question is, and another example, and these are organizations which people don't think is great organizations, but gee, they're the largest private employer in the United States. Donna Morris, who's CHR of Walmart,
Oh yeah,
we
yeah, I know
talked.
Walmart.
She's amazing, and Donna is a massive master friction fixer. When she was at Adobe, she got rid of the annual performance evaluation.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what she's famous for. But Donna just describes how they've only got 8 levels of hierarchy from the store managers to the CEO, and that's and they've executed on AI introduction almost faster than any organization I
yeah,
know. So they violate all of Gary Hamel's ideas about terrible bureaucracy. They got rules, they have specialized roles, they have big salary differences, they have big power differences, and I'm not advocating that. And there's some organizations that work well with different organizational forms, uh, but it's just life, and so that's part of it. And then the other thing is that big bureaucracies that work well have friction, and they should. And I just to give you exhibit one being from Stanford is that it's a good thing that there's friction in government regulations. Otherwise, Elizabeth Holmes would have been able to get her untested and, by the way, ineffective blood testing device on U.S.
yeah,
Army helicopters, but she didn't have FDA approval, so they stopped her. In contrast, 2 students that we had at Stanford started a company called Sequel, which has reinvented the tampon. They got $5 million of venture capital, and they went through FDA approval. And I think that before women stick those things in their body, it should be FDA
yeah.
approved.
And
And by the
people who
way,
don't know, Elizabeth Holmes is Theranos. That was I
Theranos.
think yeah, Theranos. Isn't she in prison now? I believe she is.
I think she's awaiting sentencing or
Awaiting
something
said,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
No, I think maybe I'm not sure she's in prison or not, but she will be soon.
yeah.
And by the way, she's famous for being the dropout. The two students, Greta and Amanda are their name, who started this company. They also graduated from Stanford too. So
Ah,
some of our successful entrepreneurs even graduate. But the point I'm trying to make is that is that friction sometimes good. And then our favorite examples, in getting towards things that are useful in the book, are situations where smart leaders use good friction to get rid of bad friction.
yeah. And that's what we're going to talk about in a minute, is good and bad friction. So it sounds like your argument isn't that hierarchy is necessarily a bad thing or the bureaucracy is necessarily a bad thing. It's perhaps how leaders approach them and how you use those things, which matters far more than the fact that they simply exist. Because
Yes, because I'm sorry, I'm an organizational theorist, and it's like, and as an organizational theorist, I don't know how to organize. And by the way, this doesn't work for a baboon troop. Wouldn't work either without a hierarchy. You want
yeah,
another example? There's a reason this always comes. Dogs, get a bunch of dogs together, they need a hierarchy, and and um and so in some of them work well, and some of them work badly, and some of them are benevolent, and some of them are horrible.
yeah,
But railing against the basic features, it would be like, oh, if only I didn't have these damn hands. I don't know. It's like it just kind of drives me nuts when
yeah.
when
Well,
Gary when Gary rails against bureaucracy.
we'll have to get Gary and you on the show here one day. I'll ask him
Yeah, maybe.
virtually. Is that way if it doesn't go well, you could
what,
just say,
what,
"Oh,
what,
I lost connection."
well, I'm friends with Gary. I just think he's wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
So what are some examples of good friction and bad friction?
okay, so an example of good friction. I'll give you an example of good friction is, well, you're doing something creative, and rather than rushing your first prototype to market, let's just say it was a drug, but whatever it is, you don't go through. Instead, what you do is you have a creative process where you go through iteration after iteration, you go through failure after failure, you argue with the people on your team, um, and eventually, after many trials and struggle, you come up with something that seems to work. and
Okay.
and 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 this is what every product developer that we've ever studied does. This is what the evolutionary process that you see in venture capital. Jerry Seinfeld, he'll chart only 1% of his jokes that he tries survives,
Yep.
and so to me, the good friction is when a leader sort of forces people to slow down. And in the words of Steve Jobs, they don't settle. They wait till things are great. And one of the people, one of the heroes of our book, a guy I really admire, and I like to show his book because look at this is Ed Catmull's book, Creativity Incorporated. I read this pretty closely, honestly, and this was after I endorsed it. So when we talk to Ed about efficiency, he just gets confused. When he was president of Pixar for the 28 years he was Pixar, he said we would just do things over and over and over again until they met the quality standards that we held, which were very high.
Yeah.
Which was something that him and Steve Jobs agreed on. So that's one time when you need friction. Another time, and I think of this as sort of slowing down when friction is good, are situations where you can use good friction to get rid of bad friction. And kind of exhibit one. There's a guy named Laszlo Bock. I've got
Yep.
his book here too. Work Rules. Laszlo Bock was basically head of HR of Google for 8 or 9 years. There was a dysfunctional tradition that went back to the beginning where Google engineers would interview job candidates 6, 8, 12, and he said as many as 25 times before giving them a job offer. This might have worked when Larry and Sergey were trying to build the company, but it became a tradition. And just think of all the time it costs, all those interviews to schedule and how many candidates they pissed off.
Yep.
So he had to put in a simple rule, which is that if you're going to do more than 4 interviews, you need written permission from me.
Wow.
And he said the speed at which it changed was just staggering. So that's using good friction to get rid of bad friction. And then just to put in one kind of for fun is I've really gotten into this research on savoring. This idea this idea that we as humans beings, when we experience good things in life, when we slow down, when we enjoy them, when we anticipate them. I mean, you think anything from eating a great meal, going on a nice slow walk, making love, sort of, it's like all those things are better when you sort of savor them.
Yeah.
And so there's along these lines, there's a supermarket chain, the largest supermarket chain in Holland. It's called Jumbo. And they have the self-checkout stuff and everything, but they have these older citizens who feel lonely. So they have a chat line you can get in, it's a slow lane. And the idea is that the clerk chats with you for 5 or 6 minutes. And it's the exact opposite of efficiency. And they tried it in one store. They scaled it to 200 stores.
Wow.
So I mean, I have such a long list of all the ways that friction is good. And by the way, I hate friction. That drives me crazy. That's one reason we wrote the book. But along the way, we've come up with times when it's better to slow down. It's better to make things more difficult too.
So it sounds like good friction occurs when it creates either it makes you better or it creates a better product. Like it forces
Better,
you. Oh, sorry.
yeah.
What were we going to say?
Yeah. A better product, or when a decision is really hard and really irreversible. And
Okay.
Jeff Bezos talks about 1 versus 2-way doors.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it depends how much money you have, but for Amazon to throw one more product out in the market, they're not sure whether it's going to work or not. It's a 2-way door. It doesn't cost them very much money, given their net worth. But if you're going to sell your company or do a huge acquisition, or as we just saw, if you are going to fire the CEO of OpenAI impulsively without checking with your largest investor, Microsoft, like they did with Sam Altman, they didn't even have a conversation with Microsoft before, which owns 49% of the company, and that's a sign to me that if it's, I guess that did become a 2-way door.
Yep.
But it sure looked like a 1-way door. Firing the CEO, it's certainly difficult to reverse.
Yeah.
So. so it also depends on the nature of the decision and whether or not it's reversible, and maybe how important it is. And
Okay.
and I'm not arguing for going slow all the time. I'm just saying that friction is it's complicated, when to make it hard and when to make
Yeah.
it easy.
And it sounds like bad friction is really just something that's keeping you from getting to where you need to get to just for the sake of stopping you. It's almost like I think of phone trees,
Beautiful.
right? Like one of the things that drive me nuts is when I call Spectrum or Comcast. They use technology, but they use it for the sake of using it. And you pick up the phone and you get this automated response. And I don't know about you, but when I get that, I just kind of mash all the buttons until it says, "Okay, we're transferring you to a human."
Oh yeah,
Just like,
yeah.
just why not just give me the human to begin with? If you know I'm just gonna like be punching my phone trying to just mash at numbers. Nobody finds those things helpful. That to me is an example of just a bad friction, a bad thing that's there just for the sake of being there.
So I would say yes, and it might be worse than that, because with places like Comcast, uh, the harder it is for you to get through, and the more discouraged it is, the lower their labor costs, and the longer you wait.
Oh,
So
great.
so so, so that's where it's weaponized. By the way, the example we have in the book is about Comcast. I don't know if you saw it, but the example we have is this is about 3 years ago, right after my mother passed away, and I had to deal with all these Comcast things with her,
Hmm.
these difficulties with Comcast canceling her bill and moving things, and I could not get through the phone tree. And then when I finally did, they made multiple errors. This went on for about 3 weeks,
Oh my
and
god.
finally, and this is bad. Finally, I complained on Twitter, and there's a board member I know who saw it, and he connected me to the VIP privilege line, and literally I called the phone number. The person answered on one ring, and it was this group in this group in Arizona for people who got and they waived all my fees, and everything happened instantly. And you could tell they sent the nicest guy to our house and everything, who waived all the fees. I mean, everything was it was this absence of privilege. And to me, that's an example of something that unwise organizations do, is they remove the inconveniences from senior leaders, that everybody else experiences, and therefore they don't know the problem or how to fix it. They become oblivious to it. So that's why one of our causes of bad organizational friction is oblivious leaders, who are protected from and unaware of the burdens that the system faces on the little people, customers, employees, whoever you want to talk about.
How do you know if the friction that you're faced with is a good friction or a bad friction? Because a lot of people in listening to this and watching this might be saying, "Well, I have frictions in my business and my day to day all the time. How do I know if they're good or bad?"
Well, so I don't, that's a great question, and I don't think that there's just like a general sort of answer to it. To me, you actually have to understand your business. Um, but once you start sort of calculating things in some organizations, you have to do either journey maps. You have to do the actual cost. But in one organization I know, and this is some of the solutions, they sort of do reviews of things that are making things difficult for people, or more expensive, that are just irrelevant. So we talk about one company where they figured out that it cost $200 to just send a T-shirt to a customer, because there
Wow.
were so many approvals that were required. That to me is a bad example. And then we also talk about an effort that was made at a hospital, Hawaii Pacific in healthcare in Hawaii, which is the largest healthcare system, and they had a whole bunch of elements of their electronic healthcare system, health record system. That's when you go to the doctor and the doctor never looks you in the eye. They just type the whole time because they have to, and they call it the "Get Rid of Stupid Stuff" campaign, and they got rid of all these little parts of the system that slowed nurses and doctors down. And they didn't get rid of electronic health records, but they were able to show the unnecessary burdens. So I wish there was an overall sort of answer that this is bad versus this is good friction. But a lot of times it depends on it almost always depends on the context, and also it depends on your values. I mean, what and we sort of implied this with Comcast. There's a whole bunch of organizations that weaponize friction, to use the term.
Hmm.
Sometimes they call it the Roach Motel. The
Yep.
New York Times is an example. Financial Times is an example. That it's really easy to get a subscription, and it's impossible to cancel it. And it just is. I mean, and this is the classic thing, and they're doing it because they're going to make money. And the counter example, which is really interesting, is that there's two people we interviewed quite a bit for the book. One is Patty McCord. She was
Oh yeah,
basically
I know Patty.
she was head of HR for
Yep.
first 14 years at Netflix. And there's Eric Colson, who was a senior algorithm guy at Netflix. And this isn't about 2006 or 2007. They were embarrassed because it was so hard to cancel your Netflix subscription,
Mm-hmm.
and there was so much friction. And they changed everything, and they just put in one button. And in fact, there's a couple of times when I've gone to look at it for the book, and I almost canceled my subscription accidentally, because it's so easy to do. You can do it accidentally. And so Eric Colson, who was one of the key guys who worked on this algorithm guy, I know. So he said, we did that so we could be proud to tell to tell our family and friends how easy it was to cancel. They weren't going to get screwed. But he said it had a positive effect, which he think is one of the reasons that Netflix has done so well in the
Mm.
long haul, because it's so easy to cancel. They have really good data about customer dissatisfaction that comes up really quickly, and they can respond to the market really quickly.
Ah,
So it isn't, in that case, Eric said, we did it because we were ashamed, but we figured out that in terms of a business case, it was actually great for us
yeah.
because we had better data than our competitors, and we could respond more quickly.
Hmm. So what is the point of leaders knowing about friction? So, we're talking about good and bad friction, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the traps in a little bit. But why do leaders need to know about this? Why do employees need to know about friction? How is this going to impact the day-to-day aspect of their lives? Why should they care?
Well, I mean, let's focus on bad friction. The reason that they should care, and I would take everything from the most senior CEO and to this guy at the Department of Motor Vehicles that I talk about, is who made things better for all of us visitors. Is that by understanding what is hard and what is easy to do in your organization, and also understanding ways that you, in terms of your personal, we call it cone of friction, unwittingly make things hard versus easy for people. Uh, First, you're going to have happier coworkers, you're going to have happier employees, and then the other thing is that you are less likely to lose your job. And um, and
Self-preservation, that's a good reason.
I'll give you an example at a university that I know that just got its university president fired. That would be my university, Stanford University. Um, and we had this president. He got fired in sort of some kind of cheating scandal with his academic research. But one of the reasons that he was so widely disliked by the faculty, and I may get in trouble for this, but I have academic freedom. I don't care. And one of the reasons that he was so widely disliked is he would send these long, convoluted emails, like hundreds, thousands of words long, and he would just waste our time. And if you're going to send an email, including when he was dealing with his scandal, I didn't need to hear 2,000 words about why he was innocent when he actually probably wasn't. Um, and and that's one of those things that he was just clueless to his cone of friction. And in terms of protecting his people's time, because that's one of our mottos, is that great leaders are trustees of others' time. And if you're sending an email to 2,000 people, maybe you could sort of focus on keeping it shorter, because the more productive those people are, the more credit you're going to get. And by the way, if you piss them off, that's not very good for your legitimacy either.
Yes.
I mean, that's a really, and we could do this with the number of meetings you call and so forth. But yes, for one's own preservation, and for one's own legitimacy, but it's also just for the operation of your system. And to go back to the Netflix example, that it actually gave Netflix a competitive advantage by making it easier for customers to cancel their subscriptions.
Hmm.
So that's my argument about why it matters. And then the other reason it matters is that smart leaders know when to make it hard to do things. They know when to frustrate people, uh, and so there's also the advantages of doing that too.
So it sounds like we need to purposely design good friction and purposely try to remove bad friction.
Yeah.
How do you go about doing this? So are there, I don't know, a series of steps or things that you could think about As far as, I mean, you mentioned journey maps, for example. So obviously you need to
Right.
go through kind of various processes, go through the experience of the customer. Is that really just how you identify frictions? What if it's not a process? If it's in terms of, I don't know, leadership or coaching or how you learn something, and the friction isn't related to technology, but it's in relation to interaction or how somebody leads a team?
Yeah, so I'll answer that question with sort of the mindset stuff, and then we can talk about some of it depends on the root cause, and that's why we have different on ramps in the book
Yeah,
that people can hop on. But I would start with just with two mindset things. The mindset thing is when we see organizations where people are good about removing friction and getting people around them to do it, and Netflix would be an example. Amazon's actually quite impressive with Jeff Bezos too.
yeah.
Is that people have two mindsets. One is they see themselves as trustees of others' time. That doesn't mean they make time as efficiently as possible. When they made people struggle, they do it on purpose. And then related to that is and this comes from my friend Michael Deering. He's a early stage venture capitalist. He's funded more than 200 companies. Harry's Razors, Masterclass, sold I think 8 companies to
I've had
Twitter.
both of those CEOs on this podcast.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Oh, that's great. So Michael has this perspective that great leaders think of themselves as editors in chief. They're like film or book editors who try to make everything tell. So that's kind of the mindset stuff. And I, in terms of your audience, I don't want to torture them by taking them through our 5 on ramps. It'll drive them nuts. But one is you start with your own behavior as a leader. And just to give an example of a classic thing that we've done with new CEOs, new startup CEOs at Stanford, uh, some of them are bad leaders of meetings. They talk too much, they're boring. And we've had our students do a little audit. And the audit will be what's your talking time versus everybody else. And a key one is the percentage of questions you ask versus statements you make. And we have like these young 20 something CEOs which we get who do startups at Stanford, and we go to their meetings, and in one case the guy talked 80% of the time and asked no questions, and you can see the energy fall off. The students track the energy, but after he got some coaching he got better. So it's not like this is like a lifetime fatal disease. He just needed to learn. So that's the cone of friction. That's one. The second one is to start, we call it addition sickness, to start infusing this idea of subtraction throughout the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And just one example that we worked with the Asana Work Innovation Lab,
Okay.
and there's a woman named Rebecca Hines there who you should have on your show. She's fabulous.
Rebecca
Um,
Hines. Okay.
Rebecca Hines. So she's leading all these ways to try to reduce the burden on people. And Rebecca and I wrote about this in Harvard Business Review, and she led this meeting reset with 60 Asana employees. And it started with them. They went through all their standing meetings and rated them for how important they are, and basically how much of a burden they were.
Hmm.
And it turned out, I think they rated something like 1,200 meetings, and it turned out that about 500 of those meetings were low value. And
Hmm.
then she started working with people in this meeting reset thing to do things like make the meeting shorter, meet less often, cancel some of them, and the average person saved about 4 hours a week. So that to me
Wow.
is lots. One woman, Francesca, uh, 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 in London, she saved like 32 hours a month or something. It was amazing. But so that's sort of subtraction. Then we talk about broken connections, and this is where really good friction fixers are organizational designers. They're trying to figure out how all the pieces fit together. And just one key problem in organizations, healthcare, it's terrible where this
Yeah.
happens, are handoffs between people in silos. That's one of the places where when we work with organizations, we look to see how the handoffs happen and to make sure that people communicate with one another. And there's lots of examples we dig into in the book. And in healthcare, this is just a terrible problem. If any of us have a relative or ourselves become ill, uh, the biggest problem, one of the biggest problems is when we're handed between different specialists and different intertwined appointments, it's on us or our family members to figure out how to navigate the system.
Hmm.
I live in Silicon Valley, so there is, if you throw a rock and you hit a venture capitalist, it's literally true in this case. I could throw a rock out my door right now, and I would hit the venture capitalist next door, and he talks about the notion that healthcare is all about friction and fragmentation, and there are ways to fix it we can talk about. And then just a last one for fun, we got sort of obsessed with jargon monoxide. So this is the language that people use in organizations that doesn't mean anything,
I don't know what you're
confuses
talking about.
people.
I'm not familiar with any of this.
Yeah, you don't know. You go to a meeting and you don't know what the hell they're talking about. And so that's another place where being an editor in chief matters, is to look at your own language and to really edit the language that's used in your organization to get rid of as much jargon that undermines communication and confuses people.
Yeah.
So those are some of the intervention points.
Great news. My brand new book, Leading with Vulnerability, is now officially out, and I'm so excited to share the insights from the 100 CEOs and the 14,000 employees around the world that I surveyed. And the whole book explores why you should not be vulnerable at work, but why instead you should lead with vulnerability. In other words, don't just focus on exposing your gaps, but also talk about what you are doing to close those gaps. That's the difference between being vulnerable and leading with vulnerability. If you want to learn more and grab a copy, head over to leadwithvulnerability.com. Again, that is leadwithvulnerability.com. Okay, so before we jump into kind of where to begin as far as the action items, maybe one more question for you. And this is really around, you have a section of the book called Friction Forensics, around some questions that you should be asking. So what are some of these questions that we should be asking when we're thinking about good friction or bad friction to try to just understand where we're at?
Well, I mean, being academics, we probably have an overly long list, so I'll pick a couple. One is, and this is Nobel Prize winner Danny Kahneman says, when you're in a cognitive minefield and things are messed up, you don't know what to do. Rather than rushing forward, sometimes the best thing is don't just stand there, or don't just do something, stand there. So you got to kind of slow down and figure out, should we go faster? Should we go slow? And as we discussed before, especially if it's an important, irreversible decision, it might be better. And there's even some evidence that if you can get doctors to slow down when they make a diagnosis and think about it a little bit more detail, maybe check with a few colleagues rather than they actually screw up less. So
it's hard to slow down in a fast world because we're constantly, it seems like everything is accelerating speed and this and that and notifications and get this done quicker. And it's hard in that kind of environment where everything around you is moving so quickly to almost freeze time and say, you know what, everything around me can move quickly, but I'm going to be like Neo in the Matrix and I'm going to slow down a little bit and stop those bullets.
Well, you can, once again, you can just roll over and say, I'm screwed. I'm just going to run as fast as everybody else. But if I sort of look at where people make great decisions, who are entrepreneurs who go very fast,
yep,
that they often will slow down to figure out whether or not something's a good decision or not. And when they don't, to go back to the example of OpenAI, gee, if they just slowed down for like a week or two before they made that decision and got all the constituencies aboard, would be important. And by the way, since everybody's all obsessed with artificial intelligence and large language models, the evidence that is starting to emerge is that, and by the way, this reflects Microsoft's strategy, but there's earlier evidence on artificial intelligence as well, that when people implement artificial intelligence tools, when engineers do, when they go back and forth with the experts that whose data they're capturing and get them on board, and it ends up being a better tool, and there's less resistance when it's implemented. So again, slowing down so you can go faster later might be worthwhile. And then I guess the second one, which I'm implying by this, is when you're doing creative work, all the evidence that we have is that the best creators, although they might go be less efficient in some ways, for example, by failing faster, they accept that it's a failure-ridden, inefficient process.
Hmm.
And and again, there's things that they do to try to go less slow. So if you're doing creative stuff, and then one other time when you might want to think about whether to go fast or slow is if you are having issues or are concerned about making an ethical or moral decision.
Yeah, yeah.
There's there is actually really good evidence that if you want people to do something that's ethically questionable, put them under time pressure.
Yeah.
It's one of the most reliable ways to get people to be unethical. So those are. Oh, and then another thing that I think is less sort of judgmental is you might want to make a decision about whether you can do things quickly without people having deep knowledge of one another's personalities and skills, or you really want to slow down to do that. So when it comes to flying a commercial aircraft, or even when surgery happens between a doctor, a nurse, and an anesthesiologist who never met each other before, they don't have time to figure out one another's personalities. They have to jump in there and do stuff. They know the roles, they know the rules well. Nonetheless, there's very good evidence. Everything, including surgical teams, by the way, everything, founding teams of CEOs, people put on Broadway plays, people who do product development. When people have worked together before for a long period of time, they tend to do better work, including better creative work.
Yeah, I'm totally not surprised at all.
Yeah, well, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, they screwed around for like years doing things like selling boxes to steal phone calls and stuff like that when they were kids. They were phone freaks. So Larry and Sergey, they did some student projects together. You could just go on. Hewlett and Packard, who started the original entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, they did a bunch of student projects together in the 50s at Stanford. So
Wow.
So when we look at our founding teams, and then of course he just died, but Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett, they worked together for 50 years.
Yeah,
So
it's crazy.
they did all right.
Crazy.
So those are just some of the kind of friction forensics that we tried to use. But I would start with the number one thing, which is that when things are messed up and you're confused and you don't have a good solution, oh man, you might want to slow down and figure out what the heck is going on for a few minutes.
Yeah. All right, let's jump into the Leader's Toolkit section where we talk a little bit about one particular topic and dive deep in it, and that's specifically where to begin. So I don't know if you have like a series of steps. If Journey Map would be, for example, a step that would be on this process, but for people who are trying to identify the frictions, create more of the good, eliminate the bad. They just finished listening to this podcast or watching it. They get back to work tomorrow and they're thinking, okay, I'm really inspired by Bob Sutton's book. What do I do? All right, everybody, my conversation with Bob Sutton continues for subscribers of Great Leadership Plus on Apple Podcasts and in the Leader's Toolkit, this bonus conversation. We're going to be talking about some specific action items around where to begin. And Bob is going to share two exercises. One is called the Good Riddance Report, and another one is called the Subtraction Game. So if you want to figure out where to begin with identifying bad friction and how to remove it and how to create more good friction, that's what that bonus episode is all about. Of course, I encourage you to grab a copy of my new book, Leading with Vulnerability. You can do so at leadwithvulnerability.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend, a coworker, somebody who you would like to see become a better leader. And I invite you to join the Substack community. You can get 20% off by going to greatleadership.substack.com/GL podcast. I know it's a complicated URL. So to make things easier, you can just email me, jacob@thefutureorganization.com, and say, hey, I saw this episode that you did with Bob. I heard that you have a 20% discount. I'd love to take advantage of that, and I'll go ahead and hook you up. Again, it's jacob@thefutureorganization.com. Thanks again for tuning in. I will see you next time.